Welcome to the San Jose Astronomical Association Imaging Special Interest Group December 2020 meeting. Tonight we are going to have our member Steve Sells start off presenting on his adventures with the Skywatcher Star Adventurer, I guess you'd call it a mount, and how he uses that in his imaging and navigating around the sky. And we'll follow that with some other topics as they come up, general discussion. And I know Glenn has something he wanted to add. So let's get started.
Okay. It was almost 2 years ago, at the end of 2018, when I took my first astrophoto. And I was an amateur photographer before I was an amateur astrophotographer. I'm new to this laptop. Some photography can be done without tracking. The secret is to keep your focal length down and your exposure down, and then you'll have reasonably round stars. The rule of 500, for those of you who haven't heard of it, you divide 500 by the full frame equivalent of your lens. You get then the maximum exposure time you use before the stars get too oblong. The picture here was taken about 60 frames with a 16mm lens. I have a Nikon D50-600 with a crop factor of 1.5. So that gives a full frame equivalent of 24. You divide that into 500, you get 20 seconds. But I picked 10 seconds. I like rounder stars. For longer exposures or longer focal lengths, you're going to need tracking to compensate for the rotation of the Earth. Here's the Star Adventurer in its simplest setup with the ball head adapter and a ball head to mount the camera. I got this in February of 2019. That's 2 months after I got started. And for me, it was just a matter of getting my feet wet. When I got the Star Adventurer, I continued to use the camera, lenses, and tripod that I already had. So for me, Star Adventurer was just another camera accessory. I still use the same camera, same lenses. The main body of it contains the motor. It's a stepper motor. The Earth goes around once a day. This motor goes around once a day, but it goes in the opposite direction. So as the stars appear to go across the sky, this tracker will follow them. You see it's tilted up at an angle. In order for that rotation to work well, the axis of the motor needs to be parallel with the axis of the Earth. So it's tilted up at an angle equal to our latitude. So it's pointing at the north celestial pole. The device that it's sitting on is called an equatorial wedge, and that's what adjusts the angle. I think that's enough for the moment. The ball head adapter you see here does come with a Star Adventurer. The ball head doesn't. For me, I just unscrewed the ball head from my tripod and used that. And then I had a tripod with nothing on it. So that's where I screwed on the equatorial wedge. Essentially putting the Star Adventurer in between the tripod and my ball head. You can use the ball head for wide field lenses. For me, up to about 50 millimeters. It doesn't work real well with telephoto lenses or heavy lenses. That's just the nature of a ball head, and you need to have a pretty solid, rigid connection in astrophotography. Anyway, it's an easy way to get started. This is an example of a picture I took. This is just a single 60-second exposure showing it's taken with a 35 millimeter lens. That's the widest, that's one of the widest that I have. Here's the full configuration. You buy the Pro version. You see we've added a full-length dovetail and a declination bracket and a counterweight. And you could put a ball head on it, but I don't recommend it unless you're just using it as a tripod, in which case you can put the counterweight down, and essentially your ball head sits on the top of the rig, and that's pretty good for some kinds of landscape astrophotography. About the blue masking tape, that's for holding the zoom setting, which in this case is 200 millimeters on a 70 to 300 millimeter lens. This camera and the lens I bought for nature photography, but it's been getting a lot more use since I took up astrophotography. Here's an early example taken with that configuration. At 270 millimeters. That was before I learned about the masking tape. It was supposed to be 300 millimeters. This picture shows the eyepiece for the Polar Alignment telescope. That telescope runs through the middle of the axis of the motor, and you point it at the North Celestial Pole, and then use the position of Polaris and the time to figure out, to get yourself pointed at it in exactly the right way. I guess you don't see here the adjustment screws. Maybe we'll talk about that later, maybe not. And the dials here are a kind of circular calculator to calculate the position of Solaris, of Polaris at your current time and longitude. I don't use this calculator. There's an app available for your phone called Skywatcher SAM app. SAM stands for Star Adventure Mini. It's a slightly different model, but it shows you exactly what you should see when you look in the eyepiece. It shows you a clock face with a dot for the position of Polaris, and so you just match up what you see in the telescope with what you see on the app. And I never did use this. I always used the app. But I saw there's a new model that's just come out, and you'll be interested to know, Bruce. I see it has just come into stock. All the dealers have it now. It's finally shipped. It's brand new. And it has this calculator, but there's nothing in the manual about how to use it. So the 2i comes with an app that you use. This is one of the first things I added. My rig evolves. One of the first things I added was a right angle viewfinder. I had trouble when I was first starting with polar alignment, and this makes it a little bit easier. I just got a right-angle viewfinder from Amazon, and I bought the adapter from Philippe Lica. He's a French amateur astronomer who 3D prints accessories for the Star Adventure. And that's his URL if you have the urge to buy some of his nifty products. I'm a big fan of his. It seems like a fair portion of the attendees tonight are 3D printers. One of the problems I had when I wanted to mention about Mark Strybeck. He has a blog called Diaries of a Rookie. And the blog's tagline is, astrophotography combines some of my major passions in life: mathematics, astronomy, computers, and buying gadgets. That really helped to put in perspective for me what the hobby is about. It's about whatever you want it to be about. Among my passions are astronomy, computers, making things, and buying gadgets. So when I was first getting started, even when I could see what I wanted to aim at, I could see it with my naked eyes, but I had a hard time getting the camera pointed at it. So I got a red dot finder and put it in the camera's accessory shoe. And then later I got this, I got the laser sight, and then I bought this bracket so I could mount them both at once. And then I decided, well, I might as well have a finder scope, so I added a finder scope. So now I have no trouble finding whatever I can see in the sky. This is a declination circle that I added. It doesn't come with it, but if you have a Star Adventure, I recommend it. It's not just a simple disk. It has two moving parts. The disk that you see here and a hub, which you don't see, which holds it away from the declination brackets, mounting pad, and the bottom of the camera. So what it means is you can turn the disk relative to the hub with your hand, which you see I'm doing here. And you set that to, essentially you have to calibrate it every time you set up your rig. And there are other uses for it too. But you don't need to have a computer to take advantage of this. I'll talk about computers later. About a year ago, boy, was it that recent? Yeah. I traveled to a dark site to take a picture of the Sator region. And before I left home, I looked up on a star chart to figure out how I was going to find it in the sky. But I was really a novice. Sator is a fairly bright star, so it shouldn't be that hard to find at a dark site. But at the site, the sky didn't seem to look much like the star chart I expected it to. The stars look a lot different on a chart than they do in the actual sky. They're tinier, for one thing, and it's harder to tell one magnitude from another. Anyway, I did the best I could. I thought I had it. The next day, I started processing the subframes I'd brought home, and I realized that the star that I picked was the wrong one, and the nebulosity I expected to see in the Sator region was nowhere to be found. So a major mistake. I was brand new to this. If I had had this declination circle, I would have nailed the declination. You pointed at a known star, look up the declination, set this circle to match the declination of the star that's in the middle of your camera's field of view. And then you you can either loosen the clutch and change the declination. That circle will move as you move the arm, and bring it around to where the declination on the dial matches. If I had had this, I would have gotten the declination exactly right, which would have made it impossible for me to pick a star that didn't have approximately the same declination. In fact, I could have just swept back and forth in right ascension, and I would have quickly found the star, and I would have been real sure I had the right one. I do recommend that for people. I keep losing my key here for that. This is like computerized rig. I learned a lot about computerized rigs in this SIG meeting. A lot of people have described their rigs and how they use them, and a lot of them have computers. So I was kind of jealous of that. And my background is in computers. I worked most of my career for computer companies. And I'm a kind of an enthusiast about computers. But I thought, I really don't want to burden my rig with bulky laptop. But I found out from Philippe Lique that you could use a single board computer and a tablet instead of a laptop. And I said, okay, well, this would be very, very easy to transport. And as it turns out, it's a very good way to go. About the same time, I discovered that you could use a guide scope for both auto guiding and for polar alignment. So you didn't have to have two separate scopes for those two functions. So that's when I set the whole thing in motion. And I bought the Latte Panda. What you see here in the picture, the camera, the lens, the declination circle, QHY mini guide scope, perfect for this application, and monochrome guide camera to go with it, and the Star Adventure. And then the red thing there is a William Optics equatorial wedge. I finally just gave up on the original wedge in despair. I thought it was too flimsy, and it had a very hard time holding the altitude. Instead of a proper lock on the latitude, it had a clutch, and it seemed like you could never get it tight enough to keep it from gradually sliding down. And this thing had recently come out. It weighs about 3 times as much as the one that comes with it. And it's about 3 times as expensive too, but boy, it is a wonder. That's the kind of mount that the kind of wedge you would have for a proper telescope mount. And this greatly improved things for me. Here's the computer, the Latte Panda. I have the Delta 432. It's a pretty cool computer for something that's as cheap and as small. It's got an Intel Celeron CPU, quad core, 4 gigabytes of RAM, 32 gigabytes of internal storage. I disabled the internal storage and put in a 256 gigabyte SSD, which connects to the PCI bus. It's screamingly fast. It's the fastest disk I have ever owned, and they are cheap. That's about $65. Samsung, top of the line. It also has 3 USB 3.0 ports. It has Ethernet, audio input and output, and it has Arduino capabilities, which I haven't used. but it is kind of a maker's computer. And it also came with a small AC power supply. And of course, Windows 10 Pro. The whole thing, including the Windows 10 Pro and the shipping, was $228. That's cheap for such a lot of power. In the blue bag hanging from the bottom of the tripod's center pole is a power bank, and this was just a great choice. It has a USB-C power distribution port. Power distribution protocol allows it to negotiate with the load device as to what voltage will be used, which in this case is 15 volts. And it also has two USB 5-volt ports. And you see one of them is used here to power the router, and it powers the computer as well. I have never drained this below 50%. I've never drained it down as far as 50% in actual use in astrophotography. It runs down if you forget to unplug the computer and leave it for a few days. The router is USB powered, and I run it in hotspot share mode, and it makes a connection via Wi-Fi to the hotspot in my phone. Whoops, sorry, I accidentally touched the mouse. That provides internet access to the computer and to the tablet I use, even when I'm out in the field. Here's my display. It's also my mouse and keyboard, and the software is the computer runs a Type VNC server, which is free, and the tablet runs the Real VNC Viewer app, and then the tablet connects to the router via Wi-Fi. I just got the router about a month ago. I had a lot of trouble with Wi-Fi Direct on the computer. It just wasn't robust, and so I gave up on that and got a router. If you have a tablet that you want to connect to the computer that's running your rig, all you would need to buy is the TP-Link router, which is about $40 at Amazon. One of the nice things about using a tablet is on a cold night, when I'm at a remote site, I can just get in my car, stay warm. I can even hang my tablet on the sun visor. The case flips over and you can hang it on the sun visor. And that way I can monitor the action and keep warm at the same time. My key keeps early in the lockdown, I learned to use my equipment at home. I live in a townhouse complex, and we've got lots of street lights, plus all the light pollution of Menlo Park. So it's really not a great place for taking astrophotos, though I have taken some. But certainly it's a great place for learning your rig and experimenting and practicing. And for that, I don't have to go to a dark site. When I go to a dark site, I want to have everything down pat. I don't want to be experimenting and learning how to use it at a dark site where I've spent 2 hours to get to. I want to concentrate on taking some pictures. SharpCap Polar Alignment is way easy. It uses the guide camera. I have it set here to take a picture every 2 seconds. you point it in the general direction of the North Pole. You don't have to be very close. You need to be within a few degrees of the North Pole. So if you can see the North Star, you can just eyeball it and point in that direction. That's close enough. The first thing it does is it takes a picture and it plate solves it. And from that, it knows where you are relative to the actual North Pole. Then it takes another picture after asking you to rotate them out. I've skipped one screen. On the previous screen, it says that down here towards the bottom in bright yellow, it says next. You click that, it takes you to another screen. It says turn your mount by about 90 degrees, 60 to 90 degrees. Doesn't have to be accurate. And there it takes another picture. And by comparing the two pictures, it can calculate where you are pointing. So now it knows where the North Pole is, it knows where you're pointing, and it gives you your error. And it tells you which way you need to move the mount. Here you see it's telling me to move the mount 2 degrees and 34 minutes to the right, and move down by 17 minutes. It's pretty close on the altitude, because I don't change it. If I'm using it here at the house on repeated nights, it doesn't change. So I'm always pretty close. You make those adjustments. Now this takes several iterations. So, but in 5 minutes, I can get down to around 10 seconds, which is unbelievably better than you need. And I've only been able to accomplish this since I made a big effort to tighten up my rig and reroute the cables and so forth, to check everything. I was getting round star, I was getting oblong stars, and a lot of things that can cause that. So I did everything I could, and in the process, it greatly improved my ability to polar align. Another program that I'm running, and understand when I started out to get this computer set up, this was one of the things I knew I wanted to do, just like I wanted to do the polar alignment. There were other things that the computer could do for me, which I hadn't realized yet, but you'll see. Most of you know what PH2 guiding is, but essentially it's set up here to take a picture every 3 seconds, and it's tracking a star that it has selected, and it's checking to see, have you moved away from that star? And if you're in it, since the rig has only one motor, it can only make corrections in right ascension, but those are the important ones. To get your declination, if you look at the red line here is the declination. It is pretty solid. My polar alignment is excellent. You can see down near the lower left, it says polar alignment error, 0.5 minutes. That's very good. So I'm not having any problem with the declination, and the vertical bars are correction pulses that the program is sending to the mount, saying slow down for so many milliseconds or speed up for so many milliseconds. And you probably notice that there's kind of a sine wave here, and that is due to the periodic error of the mount. In other words, the PH2 software is dynamically correcting for the periodic error, which has a 10-minute cycle. on that. I'm going to go through an example of how I get how I get my camera pointed at exactly the spot that I want. I begin by setting in Stellarium. This is a free star chart program. Set it in Stellarium, the parameters of the camera sensor and the lens, and it calculates what my field of view is. I also tell it the orientation. This orientation is called 90 degrees, and that's just because the camera is mounted flat to the declination. So in other words, there's no ability to rotate the camera when you use the declination bracket and mount the camera directly on that declination bracket. So what the Stellarium has done here is draw for me. I think I searched originally for Satyr, and it drew this rectangle. It's 6.5 degrees by 10 degrees. Drew the rectangle around on the star chart, and then I can move the star chart underneath the rectangle with the mouse until I get it composed the way I want it. And then what I do next is I pick out a star that's real close to the midpoint, that there's a little tiny red plus in the middle of that rectangle. And I pick out a star near there, ideally one with a name, and I click on that, and I get from that the right ascension and declination of the center of my frame. So that's what I'm going to try to target. And I write those coordinates down on Notepad, which I'll use later on. What I did next, I took this, I usually make this up in the afternoon. I do this part in the afternoon. And then when it gets dark and I've gotten polar aligned, the camera focused and so forth, then I point in the general direction of where I want to be. In this instance, I picked out a bright star, which I thought was going to be fairly close. And I just pointed a laser pointer at it, and roughly, and I took a 2-second picture. Here's the 2-second picture taken with the Nikon camera. And I click over on the right, you see the point craft with plate solving. I click on blind, it does a blind plate solve on that picture and tells me where the middle of the picture is. That took only 28 seconds, and this is not a powerful beast of a computer, 28 seconds. And you can see the bright numbers on the right near the top. That's the right ascension and declination result. And I've written that on the notepad. So you can see I was pretty darn close. I'm off by about 26 minutes in right ascension. You can see I have calculated that by hand. So I take that then to the next step, which is to make a correction. Whoops. Oh, one of the things that you can do with APT, which is a program that runs, it's kind of the central program that I use, and it coordinates with a number of other programs, namely the PhD2 and Stellarium, and All Sky Plate Solver, and it coordinates, and it also runs the camera. It can run the camera shutter, and tell you the state of the camera also. So what I did was I clicked on show, and it passed the celestial coordinates from the plate solving and the orientation and so forth to Stellarium. And I bring up Stellarium, and there's a rectangle. That's where I'm actually pointed when I took the picture. And you can see the star, the bright star I picked out by eye, turns out to be Deneb. And it doesn't matter whether you're close or not. If you're off by 30 degrees, this is not a problem in this technique that I've worked out. So that's back where we were. That's the same slide again, sorry. That's how you adjust the declination. The first thing you do, you know that where you're pointed is at 46.2 degrees. So you set that, you calibrate your declination circle by moving that circle to 46.2. And then you move the mount. This declination bracket has a fine tuning knob, and you just turn that knob until the circle comes around to 40.7 degrees, and you have your corrected declination. Now what to do about the right ascension? We said we're off by 27 minutes. As it turns out, I figured out that this top circle in the picture here, the top circle of the calculator, can be used as an hour angle circle. Hour angle is not something that that I hear much in our meetings. I guess that's from an earlier era. That's when I was in college and had a little exposure to astronomy. I knew what hour angle was because that's how you set your telescope. Right ascension and hour angle are very closely related, but you can see that circle there is calibrated in minutes, and you see the minor marks on the circle are every 10 minutes, and that circle doesn't move. Hour angle is measured in the opposite direction of right ascension. And so I'm using that top circle as an hour angle circle. On the lower circle, and that circle, you can calibrate that with your hand, just like we did with the declination circle. You can just move that with your hand. I need an index, so I took the middle of the lower circle, which is halfway between 11 and 12. That's New Year's Eve. And I use that as an index pointer. It doesn't matter what you use, as long as you use the same, always use the same one. Use halfway between 11 and 12. So this is currently set to hour angle 0. So this is the same slide again. 26 minutes we're off, where our right ascension is 26 minutes too high. So here's my method for adjusting that. So we're 26 minutes too high. And so we need to, remember they go in opposite directions. So as you increase the hour angle, the right ascension will decrease. So you begin by calibrating this. Just move that circle to 0 like we saw in the earlier slide. And then you loosen the clutch and turn the mount, the dovetail, you turn that until, and understand this lower circle moves with the eyepiece and with the mount, or I guess they call it, sorry, I don't know what I remember in the manual, they have a name for that. I think anyway, it's, you rotate the mount about the right ascension axis until the hour angle reads 26 minutes. That solves the current problem in our example. If the right ascension were too low by 26 minutes, it's kind of the opposite process. Instead of increasing the hour angle by 26 minutes, you're going to decrease it. So the pictures would be switched. You turn the lower dial until the index points to 26 minutes. Then you rotate the mount until you get back to 0. On with the example. I took another 2-second picture and plate solved it. And this is the result. Now we're off by 1 minute and 35 seconds in right ascension. We're off by 17 minutes in declination. That's pretty close. Remember, the field of view is 6.5 degrees by 10 degrees. It's kind of unusual to get this close in just one iteration. Sometimes you have to take 1 or 2 iterations to work yourself closer and closer to where you want to be. But as it turns out, this one, I kind of hit it the first time. And those errors are roughly 1/4 of a degree. 1/4 of a degree in declination, 1/4 of a degree in right ascension. So, well, that's close enough, don't you think? But, you know, correcting that right ascension error would be so quick and easy. How could I resist? So what I did was I turned off the tracker for 1 minute and 35 seconds, and then I turned it back on. Just an explanation of the method here. We've just used 2 of them. For large amounts of adjustment to the right ascension, loosen the clutch, rotate the mount by the desired amount as you watch the hour angle circle. Small amounts, we didn't use this technique. You hold down one of the arrow buttons, the ones I have labeled east and west. You see in the top picture, that's on the side of the mount. And that moves at 12 times the sidereal rate, which gives you 1 minute of right ascension in 5 seconds, or 12 minutes of right ascension in 1 minute. Just hold it down for the number of seconds you need, and then take another picture and plate solve it. For even smaller amounts, now we use this one to increase the right ascension by n seconds. You turn off the tracker and then turn it back on. So instead of moving the mount, you just wait a moment and let the star come to you. If you're working in the other direction, you need to decrease the right ascension. You set the speed dial to 2x. This is in the lower picture. set the speed dial to 2x for n seconds, and then turn it back to star, which is the normal run. So this same thing in two different directions. You can get, as you could see from this example, you can get very close. You can get as close as you want. I don't know if you could get to 0. I haven't tried. It wouldn't matter. So this is where we got down to 6 seconds. That's ridiculously precise. I'll be interested to hear how some of you do on your fancier rigs where you have go-to mount. I could have gotten the declination closer, but there was really no reason to. And it's kind of hit or miss when you get down that close. You don't have a real good way of measuring that small an increment. So that's it. The demonstration is done. Fini. That's how it works. The end.
That was really great, Steve.
Anybody have any questions? Any questions, comments, or I'll have to ask you questions?
I have a question. It's Rob. Can you change the guide rate on that guide port such that you might be able to make some of these corrections from the PhD, or is it stuck at 1x on the guiding port?
I tried that. I didn't have any luck with it.
Okay.
It's easier to use the buttons on the side. I think you can get up to only double speed using the guide port.
Okay. So.
And that's not really going to help you slew any significant difference.
Right.
When you use your go-to mount, how close do you get to your intended target?
I mean, pretty much as close as I want it to be, I guess, with you know, with the software that I'm using, you just give some minimum error in pixels, you know, so 30 pixels, which is, you know, some tiny fraction of an arc second, and it'll go there.
All right, well, that's the end of my questions. Anyone else? Shall we go on? Bruce, are you there?
Yep, I'm here. I think I heard somebody chiming in with a question, maybe.
Yeah. So what camera are you using for this?
The main camera is a Nikon D5600.
Okay. And you're capturing data using SharpCap or something else?
I'm using APT. I heard several people discussed their rigs in presentations to this meeting earlier. Bruce was one, Hi Merve discussed it. I think they were using different programs, but when I looked into it, the only one that supported the Nikon D5600 was APT. And as I looked into it further, APT is not only cheap at about $20, it's also a fantastic program, extremely capable, well-maintained, always making improvements. I'm quite impressed with it.
Is that a mirrorless camera or is that a full DSLR?
It's a DSLR.
Okay. Because I know APT was one of the first or only ones to reverse engineer the mirrorless camera stuff before the manufacturers started offering SDKs for the mirrorless cameras.
Mm-hmm. I know that they use the SDKs from Nikon and Canon, and I'm surprised they had to reverse engineer it. Sometimes you either have to wait or you have to reverse engineer it. You would think the manufacturer could get the SDK out at the same time the camera.
Well, there was, you know, it seemed to be like a marketing decision that, okay, these mirrorless cameras are for a target market that's different from the DSLRs. We're not going to allow tethered shooting with the mirrorless cameras, but I think they've changed their attitude. So I think now there's starting to be SDKs for the mirrorless cameras. But in the beginning, if you had a mirrorless camera, you couldn't use, you know, backyard EOS or backyard Nikon, but the APT guy had somehow reverse engineered a way to communicate to the thing via USB and trigger the shutter, etc.
Well, that would be a fun project in itself.
Yeah. But yeah, APT is I've never used it, or I never seriously used it, but yeah, it's a popular alternative to the backyard EOS and Nikon for DSLRs and mirrorless cameras.
Bruce?
Quick question for you. Do you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. You might have said this. I might not have paid attention. How long were your exposures for with this setup?
The shortest one of the pictures I showed, the shortest one was 5 seconds. That was the picture of the comet in the beginning. I took 61 5-second exposures. The longest was probably 2 or 3 minutes. That's what I usually shoot, 2 or 3 minutes. I think I may be bringing that down a little bit. I think there's really no reason to go for long exposures with that camera.
Okay, what ISO were you
Any
using?
comments on that?
The ISO that you were using for your 2 minutes or so? How much gain?
I usually use 200.
Oh, that's very, very noise free.
I'm sorry, you must have covered the microphone. I didn't hear that last sentence.
Garbled. Yeah, it's just very noise free. I'm surprised that you were getting that good an image at 200 ISO.
Let's see. I can't think of his name right now. I'll be embarrassed if he's on this meeting. One of our stellar astrophotographers in the group uses a Nikon D5500, which has the same sensor. And like me, he uses ISO 200. The camera, that sensor is said to be ISO invariant. That is, it's better to use the lower ISO and stretch it more. And the more you increase the ISO, not only does it increase the noise, it cuts your dynamic range, and it cuts it pretty fast.
No, I agree entirely that you work as low in ISO as you can. I'm just surprised you were able to get that quality at such a low ISO. Just gives me something to look forward to.
I think you just have to take more subs. And when I first got started with PhD 2, I was dithering between every exposure. Well, for short exposures, that doesn't make any sense. If you were shooting 10-minute exposures, you would only dither once every 10 minutes. So the last time I used it, I was dithering every other picture, and you could probably go to a more efficient number. That is, if you dither every 4 pictures, you would be getting more subframes per hour.
Okay, it all makes sense. It's all an integral.
Okay.
I actually have a question in the same vein. This is kind of an ignorant question because I'm new to this space, but my background is more in the landscape photography aspect of it. I understand why in astrophotography you would want to have like the widest open aperture that you can and a high ISO to collect as much signal noise ratio as you can. But once you start introducing this star tracker to allow you to stack more photos with longer exposures and allow you to have the lower ISO, how do you start thinking about aperture at that point? Like a lot of my lenses, I feel tend to perform at a higher aperture number, closer to like f8, compared to what I would normally read is normal for astrophotography. So I'm interested to hear. I'll direct this at you, Steve. What's your opinion there? And then, yeah, in general, I'm interested to learn.
I would say in general, you shoot wide open, or maybe you stop down by one stop, which will cut down your coma. That is the oblong stars in the corners. That'd be my suggestion. One of my favorite lenses now is the 135 millimeter Rokinon, and it's a f2, and I usually shoot it at f2.8 because just that one stop does improve the quality quite a bit. So, you know, it's not uncommon in a telescope that you might have f6 or f8, but in a camera lens, if it's a faster lens, why not open it up? Sometimes I have taken landscape astrophotos with 35 millimeter or 50 millimeter f1.8. And sometimes on a landscape photo, just open it wide up. Coma's not going to be noticed. And I have a couple of pretty cheap Nikon lenses. They're, you know, plastic, you know, like $150 a piece. And you don't want to look too close at the stars, but if it's a landscape photo, nobody's going to notice. Just open it up.
Cool, thank you. Yeah, I was just thinking that if you're able to have 65-second exposures at ISO 200, presumably you could also, yeah, stop down a little bit as well.
Well, if you stop down by one stop, in order to collect the same number of photons, you're going to have to stay up twice as late. So it really matters.
I think, yeah, some of the conventional wisdom, I guess, on these lenses, and first of all, you know, prime lenses versus zoom will perform better, and secondly, yeah, if you just stop down just a little bit, you usually can increase the quality of the stars. But yeah, everything plays off against another knob to turn, like staying up all night. So
yeah. If you are looking for a complex hobby, astrophotography would be a good choice.
Yeah.
I'm already working on the PhD, so I can't handle. I'm kidding. This is wonderful. This is so cool.
Well, it's a lot of fun for those of us who like challenges. I have an engineering background. I like to solve problems. I like to figure out how to make an improvement. And you have a lot of opportunities in this. And some of the people here tonight at this meeting love to do that kind of thing too.
One thing I'd like to add about stopping down these lenses is that once you start stopping down, you're going to start getting diffraction spikes around the stars. And some people like them and some people don't. If you want to stop down a little bit and not get the diffraction spikes, then you can use a mask, basically a hole cut into something opaque that you put in front of the lens so that you can make the aperture smaller without having the blades that are used for stopping down the lens internally. And that works really well.
A camera lens isn't designed for astrophotography.
Right.
You know, people are pixel peep and look closely at the stars sometimes, and it's hard to get them consistently round with a camera lens. So, like, you shouldn't go out and buy a $2,000 telephoto lens to use for astrophotography. It just doesn't make sense. But to use whatever lenses you have, that makes sense. And if you have $2,000, you could buy a telescope.
Very true. Anybody have any more questions? Okay. Hey, Steve, can you stop your screen sharing?
Sure.
And there you go. Thank you so much for presenting on this, Steve. It was really interesting. You piqued my curiosity about the Star Adventure some more. So we'll see whether I go for one or not. But I appreciate it. Thank you. Did anybody have any images?
If I interject, one of the
I'm sorry.
Yeah, I just to interject. One of the things when I started looking into this, I saw the price of the guided mounts and decided as a first step to build my own barn door. And that is an interesting way to achieve a certain degree, a very limited degree, but a certain degree of tracking out of this. And it's relatively easy and straightforward to do. I've now graduated to a full nature mortgage on the house and selling 2 children to buy a telescope, but that's another story entirely.
Yeah, that's definitely another way you can go. Yeah, a lot of people,
I have some pictures if you want to look at them.
Sure, PJ. Let's see what you got.
Ah, yes. Let's see. Let's see. Share screen, right?
Yes.
Taken shots of most all these things before, but it's always interesting to try for something different as to what the equipment or my unlimited or limited understanding of this process can do. So Heart Nebula that I took, it is a white balance to the stars, to the nearby stars, I should say. And the other ones are, of course, got a lot of dust coming through that changes their color. So this is more of a visual light representation of it. And you can see that most of the stars that are small, hopefully they're farther away, tend to be reddened by the interstellar dust is my interpretation of what it is. So this is, again, this is M78, again with a white balance with the foreground stars. It looks quite a bit different than a lot of pictures you see done of it. But it kind of looks how it would look visually if I had a 100-inch telescope. This is something called the Medusa Nebula, which is, I believe, a portion of a planetary that had an interesting lifetime. So as you look at this, you can see that the stars have sizes that are a little bit on the big side. And I think that's just an artifact of the optical system, how it interacts with the camera. Now, this is the Muscle Man cluster. And this is a prime example of how too much light can kind of lose the forest in the trees kind of situation. Because it's supposed to be an open cluster, but damn, if I can see one in it. So just looks like a great star field that I've done. And this is something I made kind of prettier. This is another shot of the Sculptor galaxy. That's a pretty one. The problem, the issue that one has with color, especially when you're shooting objects that are down low, is your stars are going to have a little chromatic effect, where one side of the sky star is blue and the other side is red. So this is a prime example of it. So I just don't have my wedge prism in the optical system yet. This is a interesting one. I haven't seen too many pictures of this, but this is a dwarf galaxy about 3 million light years away. And it has an interesting name, which is abbreviated in WLM, dwarf. And evidently there's some interesting star formation going on in the middle of all this somewhere. So this is a little bit of a tough target. I had a lot of fun shooting this. I threw away about 4/5 of my subs due to one reason or another. And also a point that Steve Sells brought up in how often he wanted to dither his subs. I found out that with the rig that I have and the complication of getting my equipment to talk to each other, that I could get away with dithering every 5th shot, because I'm queuing over 100 of them, or actually I'm shooting more like 160 shots at a time. And by the time I throw out the ones that got dithered, because the QHY camera is always recording, I have not figured out a way with my equipment to have it do a proper dither. Well, to stop taking picture, dither, settle down and shoot again. I just dither about every 5th shot using my Canon at backyard EOS, shooting dummy shots, and the PhD, and it'll just dither according to what the Canon tells it, although I'm not using any shots from the Canon, and so it dithers my mount and that. And then when I go through the pictures and using Blink and PixInsight, I'm going to throw out a bunch of subs anyway, and then by the time I use subframe evaluator, I don't have that many to throw away at that point. So I may take 160 shots. If I'm lucky, I'll end up with about 70 of them that I will use for my integration process. So that's kind of where I'm at with this. So I will be glad to entertain any questions you may have.
I didn't understand why you had to throw away so many subs.
Yes. Okay. The question is, why am I throwing out so many subs? Well, because I'm dithering while the QHY camera is merrily taking shots. It doesn't pause, ever. That's the way the camera is designed. So there's been all kinds of talk about on the site about how they can get it to work with PhD in a nice manner, like say backyard EOS does it. So far, I got diddly squat with any of that stuff trying to work. And my patience, I don't have that much patience for dealing with interface issues with software programs that weren't necessarily written for each other. So goes at kind of a carryover from when I was working, that's how I say, as an engineer. So like I say, I just run backyard EOS with my Canon with a lens cap on, hiding someplace, and it's just arbitrary dithers, about maybe every 4.5 minutes. I just set that exposure in backyard EOS. In the meantime, the QHY camera is taking exposure every minute and writing it to disk somewhere. So that means that at the 4.5 minute mark, while it's taking a picture, the camera is the dither is gonna activate, and I'm gonna get a nice star trailed image. in the main imaging camera. So obviously that's no good, so I'm going to throw that out. Then there's the settle down time, which may mean that one might get thrown out, or maybe two might get thrown out because of a dither. And of course, when I'm going through in a blink, maybe there's some little bit of bad weather that comes over, and the FSH whatever will bloat the star up for one reason or another, or something like that. So I'll throw that out. When I get into the subframe selector in Pix Insight, I'm going to pretty well lop off the top third of all my star shots that have the half-width frame setting on them. So I'll just arbitrarily do that, because you see the RASA native resolution to a star image is about 4 arc second. That's if everything works great. Perfect. That's like perfect, perfect, perfect. Well, the world isn't perfect. So I'm going to have stars that are 6 arc seconds in diameter. So I want to just strip out anything that has any exterior problems and just get rid of those, because the camera is very sensitive. QH-wide camera is so very sensitive, and I'm running it at 20 degrees minus centigrade, and I'm doing all the other things right with the darks and the bias and the flats that have to be run all at the same temperature, blah, blah, blah. And I'm using the approved method to calibrate these things. I'm going to have subs that are going to have very low noise to signal ratio. So even with just 70 shots, 70 minutes total, that's what I'm getting with that, with the RASA. So I tried doing more. I even tried one time, there's a school of thought that suggests that with the camera, you should be shooting exposures no longer than 28 seconds, according to the SharpCap calculator. Well, if you do that, you're going to end up taking 700 exposures to get the theoretical maximum out of it, which is a bit of a problem in the process, to say the least. So I tried 2 minutes exposure, but I was getting too many bloated stars. So that's why I'm kind of settling down at about a minute. Seems to work reasonably okay with the rig. That being said, you know, it would be nice to have a much slower optical system, which I have designs on doing one of these days. I would like to, I have a 12-inch f4 mirror that I'd like to convert into an astrograph, but I don't know when I'm going to get around to doing that. And of course, I have the great advantage of shooting from the Sierras where skies are still reasonably dark. So that's kind of my adjustment to the situation that I'm into. So I hope that answers your question, Steve.
Yes, thank you.
Does anybody else have any more questions? I'll turn it over to Bruce.
Thank you, PJ. Some very nice images you have there. We'll figure out how to get your sound working better for the next time. Anybody have any images that they want to share other than PJ, or any other topics and adventures that you want to share with the group?
I want to remind people about the Jupiter and Saturn conjunction. Is that the right term? It's
Yes, it
kind
is.
of sort of happening all this week. I guess the closest is on the 20th. For me, it's going to be behind the roof of my house, unless I motivate to set up another rig out on the sidewalk. So I'm sort of hoping somebody takes some nice pictures. I think Maybe the goal would, if it was me, the goal would be to get the 2 planets and some of their moons. I haven't looked at it in Stellarium to see. Guess I could turn my camera on. Haven't looked at it in Stellarium to see what the moons look like, but I think you should be able to, get the 2 planets and some of their moons in a frame. So that would be kind of fun. So I guess it is going to be clear, at least for me in the East Bay, on Saturday and Sunday. So I don't know, maybe I'll motivate to do that, but it would be a major setup with it being behind the house.
I use the Clear Outside
Yep.
Astronomer's weather forecast.
Yep, that's what I use too.
And in the last couple of weeks, it changes completely every few days. Apparently the weather is very hard to forecast right now. And I would encourage everyone who wants to see or photograph those planets close together, get out every night you can. Don't wait. It could be completely cloud over on the 21st. Get out and start shooting now. According to the forecast I looked at, I think Thursday night we might have a shot. But I sure wouldn't put money on it. Tomorrow the forecast could be completely different. So just be ready to set up, figure out a place where you can go, where you have the view. It'll be, I think now it's around 20 degrees altitude. It's still fairly high above the horizon, but you are going to need a clear view to the southwest.
Yeah, one tip about Clear Outside, the way they set up their user interface, it's pretty easy to get confused as to which day you're looking at, depending on whether you're centering on midnight or centering on the current hour. And I've been confused more than once where I thought the next day was going to do something, and then it suddenly seemed to change, and it was actually just because I was displaying the grass from the current hour or something, or whichever it was. But it somehow it's just not as intuitive as it should be. So just a heads up on that, to sort of sanity check what you're looking at.
That is very confusing. I've done that myself. If you center on midnight, when you get up in the morning, you're going to be looking at last night's weather.
Yeah.
So be alert. They do mark, they list the hours across the top, and they do mark the one that's your current time. So ignore the stuff to the left. That's not that mark. That's not a forecast.
Yeah. Well, I don't know how they would do it differently, but it can trip people up. So, but other than that, it's a great resource. But
all right, everybody. Anything else? No. All right. Well, thanks for coming, and I hope to see you again next month. Unfortunately, it looks like we're not going to be getting together anytime soon because of COVID. So we'll see you back online hopefully next month. All right. Take care.
All right, thanks.
Thanks
Thank
for joining
you.
us from the Great White North there, Nick.
Good to be here. I learned a lot. Thanks for having me.
No problem.
You're all welcome to join after you're vaccinated. Come back across the border. It's cold though.
Yeah, my wife and I have plans to go to an inn in BC, Wickeninish Inn. So
Nice.
I'll take you up on that.
You might actually get it sooner than later, right, Bruce?
I'm a healthcare worker.
Right.
So yes, my wife is not currently working in healthcare, so I'm not sure.
Yeah.
About her
I have the
getting it.
opposite here. My wife thinks she's going to get it soon, but I'll be next year sometime. So.
All righty. Well, nice to see everybody. Thanks again.
Thank you.
All
Thanks
right,
so much, Steve. Take care.
Yeah, good night all.
All right. Good night.
Bye-bye.